So now here we are 2 weeks later, after having plenty of time to listen through all 3 sets of monitors. We still have been peppering in the NS10s every once in a while just to remind us of like where we had started from, what we're like baseline is. Gosh, I have some opinions about these 3 monitors.
It's really hard. They're one I have really harsh opinions on, and then the other 2 I think they're just so amazing that it's really hard to make a decision.
Bass extension, I think the Barefoots do really well. I think they have more low end extension than the ATCs. I feel like the Genelecs kind of win overall with the bass reproduction.
And like the clarity in the low end is fantastic. I feel like every single mix we put on the Genelecs, you instantly knew what the drummer was doing, and you could feel like the kick drum so clearly. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it didn't sound like flubby or anything like that. It just sounded like deep and clear.
Powerful.
And you miss some of that with ATC. I still think the Genelecs win out overall.
Yeah.
And they're tiny speakers. They're smaller, maybe almost half the size as the ATCs. But the way that they're made, they just put a lot of thought and effort into how to be able to like pack a lot into a very small package.
Oh yeah.
So I think those are my favorite for like low end reproduction. Let's talk about mid-range. So mid-range is the bread and butter of like what ATC is. Like their mid driver is they're like world renowned for their mid range driver, and that ended up, I think, making a lot of the recordings sound like richer. But sometimes I feel like maybe it's hyping that area to where I would think that my recordings sound too like mid forward, and I might mix that back a little bit, so that might make the mid range thinner or less pronounced than it really should be. As far as mid range goes, the Genelecs just seem to be the flattest overall. There doesn't really seem to be much hyping almost anywhere. They're pretty darn flat. So yeah, I mean the mid range on the Barefoots, I don't know. It was distracting for me to really even like narrow in on the mid range on the Barefoots, because my issue with like the top end, because it was so dark, was difficult to tell. So we did actually a test on our listening party where you put a piece of Kleenex and you lightly tape it over the tweeter.
Ooh.
So you can hear what just the mid range sounds like.
Oh, cool.
At that time, we only had the Barefoots and the ATCs, and the Barefoots, certainly like got rid of a lot of like definition in the speakers. Took a lot of like the high end away, which was to be expected. We did that to the ATCs, and I would still just enjoy listening to music through them. So much detail and information comes through on the mid drivers on there. It's like the tweeter on those are only for like the top end, like sparkle.
All right.
But so much of like the clarity
is coming
is actually coming through those mid-range drivers, which are just like the legendary mid-range drivers.
Well, I mean, that could explain why I feel like on the ATCs we're hearing so much more in a recording, because it's accentuating like every sound that happens in the mid-range frequencies. Yeah. So that's wild.
So let's talk about like top end to monitors. What were your thoughts?
Gosh, on the high end, I mean, I feel like in the Barefoot, like we've said, it instantly was like there was a blanket over the mix, which was like lack of detail and any kind of sparkle, I would say. Something about the Genelecs that I feel like feel more magical, like but also at the same time, and I don't know if this is exactly just the top end, but it should be noted that I feel like in the ATCs, I noticed like the reverberation time of recordings more. And so, like, I feel like I hear the decay of someone's voice in a room more, or like even just like a snare hit. You notice that kind of stuff more, which keeps bringing me back to the point of like what is more important for us as the mixing engineers. a pair of speakers where we're hearing every single nuanced noise that an instrument is making and every detail, or just something that just makes things inherently sound nicer. I don't know. Obviously the Genelecs, we're hearing significantly more detail in the high end than like the Barefoots, but it's tough to make a decision, because a lot of times I think a lot of times I do actually tend to like a mix how it sounds more on the Genelecs than anything else. But then every time I switch to the ATCs, I'm like, well, I hear the shell of the tom, and I'm like, I feel like that's important, but I don't know.
Let's talk about soundstage, imaging. In my heart of hearts, I feel like the Genelecs have a much wider soundstage than the ATCs do. But there are some recordings where it is the exact opposites, where I'm like, the ATCs sound so much bigger and wider than the Genelecs.
And then there were instances where we were listening to it like yesterday, where it felt like the Genelecs were really wide and then the ATCs got really tall. And so that was a different aspect that I had ever thought of.
And because the Genelecs are coaxial speakers, they tend to have a much larger sweet spots than the ATCs, which the drivers are more kind of like traditionally placed on the front of the monitor. I think I want to try and experiment with moving the ATCs slightly wider and then putting the Genelecs a little bit more like closer together and see if that's a more fair comparison between them. My gut feeling is the Genelecs just are the way that I prefer to mix. Like when I listen to mixes on the Genelecs, I think, yeah, this is how I would have mixed things. I kind of connect more with them as a mix engineer. Whereas the ATCs, they sound really good, but I feel like I would tend to not mix so mid-forward. I might add more low-end than what they're revealing to me. And so I feel like my gut feeling is the Genelecs are the route that I would go between them.
I am of the same page. It feels to me sometimes when I'm listening to a mix and I hear the amount of detail that the ATCs have, I get really hung up on the fact that I feel like I hear more details. But I think that that's actually borderline a negative for a mixing engineer when you're trying to make kind of like broad strokes on a mix, or if you only got a little bit of time with a client to make a band sound good, you might spend more time hyping up the low end with the ATCs, or like pushing stuff in ways that it's not actually going to translate to other systems. I feel like the Genelecs are really accurate in the entire frequency range. Even without adding the sub in, you're getting the low end. It was like we took a couple mixes from another client that I had, and I was blown away with how, first of all, I was like, well, we did a pretty dang good job on some of these, man.
On the NS10s, too.
Yeah, oh yeah. God, you flip back to the NS10s, you're like, oh man, how do we do anything on these compared to the Genelecs now? So I feel like I lean towards the Genelecs. I just think that they make the recording sound extraordinarily pleasant, but we put some bad sounding mixes in there, or rather some raw mixes, and they're revealing. They know you know exactly what's wrong.
Yeah, you could hear all the stuff that you still had to make tweaks on and adjustments on.
And I feel like because it's got more low end in there, you can actually pick out what like a kick drum is doing. I feel like I was artificially adding a lot of low end to like every single kick that I ever mixed in the NS10s, that I feel like you hear actually what that is in the Genelec. So I'm pretty excited to use them on some other stuff. If I was going to pick one, it would absolutely be the Genelecs.
It should be noted too that this is not like a scientific experiment. It's kind of more of a real world experiment. So you could have the total opposite experience in your own studio space.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's important to be able to like hear the monitors in your space. I'm glad that we decided to have them in our space versus going somewhere else to listen to them, because I feel like our opinions on them could have been pretty different.
Oh yeah.
We were lucky enough to work with Sweetwater to get some monitors to listen to them in our own space here, and gives us time to be able to like demo them in a space that we're familiar with.
Yeah.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, hey man, hey, so smash that like button, hit subscribe. Thanks, fam.
I think that's it.
That feels pretty legit.
All right.